The 2010s were the formative years for many of us. They were especially so for those of us who called the internet home. This was the era where the internet drifted from its freeform expression into a more restrictive nature, before the internet became social media sites only. The 2010s were also the decade where the internet kept trying to scare us. Many horror staples got their start here or grew from their earlier iterations. Characters, stories, games, videos, and ideas underwent many changes during this decade. I want to look back at what exactly scared the internet during the 2010s. This won't be an exhaustive list of every piece of horror media that graced the internet in the 2010s, but more an overview of some of the most prominent. Starting in 2010 with a game that started the viral horror game trend, we have Amnesia: The Dark Descent. This was an indie game from Frictional Games. It had you playing the game as an amnesiac, I guess that's where the name comes from, who wakes up in a castle and must piece together his memories while avoiding different obstacles, those obstacles being the many monsters that roam the halls. Amnesia was a runaway hit upon release due to its engaging mix of puzzle and horror elements. The story was unique, the castle was plenty scary, and the monsters even more so. But what really made this game so popular were the content creators surrounding it. There were a few prominent creators who started their following with this game. The two who would go on to rule the early days of YouTube were Pewdiepie and Markiplier. The game was popular and also made these two very popular. It was the era of screaming really loud at the monitor every time something jumped out at you, which will be a trend that will continue throughout the decade. Amnesia would be one of the earliest viral horror games. These were games that quickly took an audience and captured the attention of the internet. There were many games that fall into this category, so let's focus on the next big viral horror game, Slender: The 8 Pages. Slender: The 8 Pages came out in 2012 and was more than a viral hit. In the years prior, Slender Man had spread from his origin on Something Awful to the rest of the internet. Memes, videos, ARGs, and games were all soon to follow. But the first game to really capture the essence of Slender was The 8 Pages. The game was simple in premise and gameplay. You loaded into a menu, started a new game, heard the sounds of someone hopping a fence, and then started your search for the pages. Armed with a flashlight, the ability to look in all directions, and some running stamina, you needed to find the pages before he found you. The game didn't do anything new. You just needed to collect a set of items before you could win the game. The biggest obstacle was the namesake of the game, the Slender Man. He would stalk you silently from afar at first. The longer you took, the more pages you collected, the closer you'd get. It is such a simple concept, endlessly replayable, well, sort of, and it was a viral game based on a viral meme. It quickly made its rounds on YouTube, being played by Markiplier and even Smosh played it on their gaming channel. I've played it a few times, but never won a single time. You've got me again, Slender. If you lost, there was a jump scare animation of his face up close before the game would scream at you, with static filling the screen. It would tell you how many pages you got, and then you were back at the starting screen. This screen made so many people scream, and those screams went viral several thousand times. This game also took the Slender Man lore into the mainstream. It took a lot of what was established originally, but also mixed in a heavy amount of marble hornets, who we won't be talking about today. They're essentially an unfictioned story that created most of the Slender Man lore, which the game borrowed from heavily. 2010 was a year that gave us more than a viral game and Pewdiepie though. We also had one of the most interesting unfictioned stories in Internet Story. Internet Story was created in 2010 by a man named AdamButcher. The story was told through puzzles found online. The premise was simple. A man with the username Al1 makes a website claiming that he buried 9,000 pounds somewhere in the UK. The website started with a puzzle that told you the story of the partner's tale. They were told in comic-style drawings that would supposedly lead to another puzzle. The website got little traction, but there was at least one man who took the puzzles seriously. A man going by the name of Fortress decided to post videos on YouTube about every puzzle he solved. He figured out the first puzzle and found his way to the puzzles in the real world. Here he received another puzzle about a whale tip. What it really meant was that the treasure was hidden on a farm in Wales. The man records himself on the train to his location. He held a shovel as he figured the treasure would need to be dug up somehow. This was also the last time anyone would hear from the account and the man named Fortress. However, there was a police report claiming that the body of a man was found on a farm in Wales. Was this deceased man Fortress? Well, that's all part of the speculation. The full story can be found on AdamButcher's YouTube channel, which tells the story in more detail. Needless to say, this was a great piece of horror to kick off the decade. Continuing with the unfiction ARG discussion, we also got one of the best Slender stories ever told. If Marble Hornets laid the groundwork for what the internet could do with their creations, then Everyman Hybrid showed you how you could further mold those creations. Everyman Hybrid was an ARG that began life in 2010 with a similar premise as Marble Hornets, but they had their own spin on it. It started as a fake workout channel and even had videos just about working out and best practices. It soon had Slenderman appearing ominously in the background as just part of the scenery. Soon we find out that this was done on purpose, to drum up interest for the channel. By having Slenderman appear in the background, they could try and go viral. This would be a big win for the channel. However, it was the start of summoning the real Slenderman to haunt the group of friends. Everyman Hybrid also used the rake in their story, another internet legend. Their use of the rake was perfect for the story too, but did make the two entities sort of at odds with one another. It was done well, but it skirted the line real close. Everyman Hybrid would conclude its story in 2018 with an 8-year run that ended alongside the popularity of Slender himself. Slenderman will always be a part of the internet, but not so much on the front page anymore. Slenderman was the creature that brought the internet horror medium of creepypasta to the front page of the internet. The Golden Age of Creepypastas was from the mid-2000s to the early 2010s. Many internet historians claim the start of the Silver Age and the end of the Golden took place in 2013. The early 2010s brought some of the most popular creepypastas out. I won't be going too deep into any of these, but there are quite a few to discuss still. Starting in 2010, we were gifted with No End House. No End House was written by Brian Russell and tells the story of a man who wished to enter the No End House. You see, there was a prize at the end if you could make it through all of the rooms. The story takes the narrator through all of the rooms of hell. It is a wonderfully creepy story and one that I greatly enjoyed. It was followed up by 2 more stories, each with a decent length to them. It's worth your time to check out if you haven't already, or you can wait until I release my coverage and analysis of the story, hopefully soon. 2010 also gave us Herobrine, the first Minecraft creepypasta. Herobrine was a bit different than the usual crowd of creepypastas. It was presented on 4chan as if it was a real entity hidden in the game. One who would haunt you and mess up your single-player worlds. A true anomaly hiding in a game that was honestly pretty unnerving when played in the right setting. The Herobrine creepypasta would go much further than expected and become a full-on meme within both the general gaming community and the Minecraft community. Music videos, animations, and mods would all feature the pupilless entity. You couldn't go anywhere in the Minecraft community forums without seeing a reference to him. Herobrine was even referenced by the game devs. It was a fun little joke, but many took it seriously. When your fanbase is made up of a lot of impressionable youth, you can expect them to not quite have the grasp of a joke yet. Thus, Herobrine became the Slender Man of Minecraft. It wasn't just Herobrine though. 2010 wasn't done with giving the internet spooky characters to check corners for. No, we also had Dead Bart hitting us in the Lost Episode creepypasta community. Dead Bart was a story that focused on Bart Simpson from the Simpsons TV series. During this time, loads of gaming creepypastas were coming out in droves and getting popular. But they weren't the only subgenre of creepypasta to grow during this time. Lost Episode pastas also had some stories that wanted some of the limelight. Specifically, we had stories about supposed creepy episodes of TV shows that couldn't air for one reason or another. Dead Bart took this idea and the usual gore of The Simpsons and turned it up as much as they could. The story had Bart falling out of a plane and dying. The only difference in this episode is that he stayed dead. There was no rug pull or any switch up. Bart was dead, and the characters of the show took it very seriously. The ending is the part that most remember. It has the Simpsons family crying at Bart's funeral, but instead of being buried, his mangled corpse is laying on top of it. There are gravestones with various celebrity names on them, but each of the dates is accurate to when the celebrity had passed away in the real world. This story brought a whole new interest to the Lost Episode phenomenon. I enjoyed quite a bit of the stories, but nothing quite raised my interest to the levels of other stories. They were fun to read and practically crafted a whole internet generation's interest in the world of horror. Before we take a break from talking about creepypastas, there was one more from 2010 that shaped the subgenre within a subgenre. There's nothing quite like a Poképasta, and that's what we got with Pokemon Creepy Black. You see, there's nothing the internet loves more than corrupting a shared piece of childhood nostalgia. Most of us grew up with a Pokemon game or two. The story descends upon the red, blue, and yellow games of Gen 1 and presents us with a story about a ROM-hacked game. This wasn't the first Poképasta to ever exist, but it's one of the earliest I remember reading and one of the most well-known. The premise is very simple, with an unnamed narrator finding a black version of one of the classic Pokemon games. Soon they find that the game is a hack of Pokemon Yellow. In the game, they are given a special ghost Pokemon. That ghost can one-shot any Pokemon and even kills trainers if the player decides. If the move, known as Curse, is used on a trainer, they are removed from the map, and a gravestone replaces where they stood, but only after you've visited Lavender Town. The story continues with the player killing every Pokemon and trainer up to the Elite Four. They win the game and even get a new scene. They are now playing as an old man. A battle ensues, and it is the old man versus your ghost Pokemon. Ghost proceeds to kill the player with the same move the player used on others. The story ends with a black screen from which the player can no longer continue the game. The story wasn't riveting in any way, but it certainly impacted the target community. Hundreds of Pokemon-themed creepypastas would follow, and even a few fan games of those stories. Taking a break from creepypastas, the 2010s also saw a rise in Easter egg hunting content. There were hundreds of channels dedicated to the scouring of games to find any disturbing, creepy, or odd Easter eggs. These channels gained sizable followings too, with many going on to become staples of YouTube. It wasn't just Easter eggs, but also the interest in what I call creepy moment content. Finding out-of-place horror in games that were not meant to be scary. A lot of these were Easter eggs, but many were not. The more popular term that has gained some following online is Nightmare Fuel. Channels that covered this content that I remember watching were Rabid Luigi, The Easter Egg Hunter, Odd Header, and Mullet Mike. These channels are still around, save for Mullet Mike, who retired recently. They produced a series of content focused on finding those hidden pieces of Nightmare Fuel hidden in video games. Some of the most talked about from the early 2010s were the Hell Valley Sky Trees found in Super Mario Galaxy 2, the Ghost and Hitman contracts, and the Ghost found in GTA 5. These are barely scratching the surface of what was found in various games over the years. I remember there being at least 20 different channels dedicated to finding these secrets. They would even do videos exploring certain theories and ideas. A big aspect of the 2010s was the internet's obsession with theories. And if you're talking about theories, you can't not talk about the biggest theory channel in existence. Game theory. I've been trying to find a place and a time to talk about my love for MatPat's Game Theory channel and the other channels. Game Theory was quite literally the channel that got me into the idea of trying YouTube out as a hobby. So you can thank MatPat for the channel. I might need to thank him if I ever meet him. The 2010s owes a lot to Game Theory. MatPat and his crew created many horror theories for the channel. Taking us into 2011, we have Game Theory's first upload. This wasn't the first horror-themed upload though, so we'll hold off on discussing it. The first video to have a horror tint to it would be his video on Polybius and its connection to MK Ultra from 2012. This was the first time that MatPat would dip his toes into connecting more serious and creepy topics, a trend we would see a lot more with in the future of the channel, but we'll get to that later. This theory essentially goes over the disturbing and true MK Ultra experiments conducted by the CIA, and their connections to the story of an arcade system. Since Polybius was more popular before the 2010s, I'll save it for now. Following this video, we'd get my favorite of the early Game Theory videos, the Companion Cube Theory. This was still an earlier piece of content, but there was some production value now seeping into the series. The video discusses the Companion Cube possibly containing a human inside. This theory is far darker than anything he'd done prior. This would all lead to a video that would go viral in 2014. This was when Game Theory would cover Five Nights at Freddy's. FNAF was like so many other viral horror games before it, but different in just as many ways. FNAF would utilize something that would become very popular in the internet realm, hidden lore to tell its story. This then led to millions of people speculating about what could be happening in the game. What was the true story of Five Nights at Freddy's? This takes us right into the most prominent horror game of the 2010s. The FNAF franchise started as a simple game where you needed to micromanage your area with bloodthirsty animatronics trying to kill you. You were stuck in a room with limited power supply, only so many ways to protect yourself, and 4 different entities trying to kill you. The game was solid, but what captured the attention of the internet was the plethora of theories surrounding the game. Some asked who you were, why you were there, and what is exactly happening in this world. It was a phenomenon that would lead to other mascot horror games as they've been dubbed, but let's look at what else is happening this decade first. 2011 saw the release of a fanfiction so messed up that it was reclassified as a creepypasta. Cupcakes was a story about My Little Pony friendship is magic. The story was gory and had one of the characters killing her friends and baking them into cupcakes, which is pretty messed up, but it wasn't the only piece of MLP horror. There was also Luna Game, which was a fan game that appeared on an MLP fan site. The game started normally for the player until you reached a certain point, in which the game would jump at you with a messed up image of one of the characters. It wasn't all that scary in retrospect, but felt like it would have been if you weren't expecting it. 2011 also gave us the I Love Jesus video. It's a pretty gory animated video that can be watched on YouTube. There are a few of these that popped up during the early 2010s. People would create disturbing videos and share them online. 2012 and 2013 also brought us some of the most talked about internet mysteries of the decade. Cicada 3301 started in 2012 and would lead a bunch of code solvers down a strange rabbit hole. One that still hasn't been solved to this day. 2013 gave us the Elisa Lam video, but I won't be talking about it too much out of the respect for her family and friends. The video definitely got many people talking online and many more in the real world. 2012 saw the release of a creepypasta that scared half the internet and make the other half cringe. Sonic.exe appeared online this year and was met with mostly praise for the use of the character and the world building of the story. The community seemed to accept the story, but most people didn't love it. Whether you liked the story or not, it was very popular. It started only as a story, but soon was recreated into a fan game, one that many of the same YouTubers we've already discussed ended up playing. Markiplier has one of the most watched playthroughs of the game. It sits at 9.9 million views as of the recording of this video. The story is told by a Sonic fan who receives a haunted version of a Sonic game from a friend. The story is full of cliches now common in the scene, but pretty much ran all of them into the ground. A strange copy of a game from your childhood, being a massive fan of the property, talking about all the changes happening in the game, and the ending. Let's just say it's not very nightmare-inducing. None of this mattered though, since the story would become a huge hit and spawn thousands of fan games. They all used the character of EXE, but some were calling him Lord X. The community came together and created interesting and even scary fan games. The original story may have been bad, but the community adopted and turned it into something positive. Speaking of corrupting childhood nostalgia, 2012 was also the year that the first story for the Abandoned by Disney trilogy was released. Abandoned by Disney was a creepypasta about an abandoned Disney resort that doesn't exist. The story is well written and engaging up until the end. An unnamed narrator enters the abandoned resort and finds that the place looks like it was abandoned in a hurry. There's a mess everywhere and he tries to piece together what might have happened there. He runs into a snake and even finds a locked room leading downstairs. It all culminates in him running into a photonegative version of a Mickey Mouse mascot suit, one that should be empty and lying limp on the ground. Yet it gets up and takes its own head off. As the narrator runs from the resort, he sees 2 pieces of writing on the wall. Throughout the story, he keeps seeing the phrase, "Abandoned by Disney," everywhere. Well, on his final exit, he sees, "Abandoned by God." The story had 2 follow-ups with Room Zero and Corrupt Us. They did their best to flesh out the story and bring it to a satisfactory conclusion. Of the 3, I feel Room Zero had the best writing, and was the one that I would gladly go back to at any given time. Corrupt Us is also a good way to close out the story. These are written by Slime Beast, and there are loads more stories from him to check out. 2012 was the era where creepypastas were soon overshadowed by their newer form. The subreddit by the name of No Sleep would soon be the preferred method of writing these stories. The switch wasn't immediate, and many would share content between the wiki and the Reddit board. We're still not done with 2011, though, which also gave us the Bongcheon-dong Ghost, a rather infamous webcomic. The story played out like a normal webcomic, that is until you neared the end. Once you did, the comic would become animated and start to scroll by itself, as the ghost in the comic ran at the screen. It was a 2010 screamer that many likely still see in their nightmares. "2013 gave us The Dawn Is Your Enemy bumper from Adult Swim. This bumper scared many who woke up to it. Rumors began to spread about what it could mean and why it was so scary. Adult Swim kind of loved this strange horror, and that would more or less become their brand in the 2010s. There was even a creepypasta focused around the bumper. Continuing into 2013, we were scared of a new horror game. The first Outlast game would be released in September of that year, and it was a game that many of us lost sleep on. The game popularized the style that made Amnesia so enthralling. It added a new element with the camera that you used for night vision and for recording what happened in the game. Outlast would go on to receive critical praise from the horror community, as well as the Let's Play community, who all played it. John Wolf was the channel that I watched before playing the game myself. The biggest piece of horror content that came out in 2013, though, was a video that I've discussed before on the channel. This was the year of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. This video went mega viral that year and was all over the front page of YouTube. I remember seeing it in my recommended for a week before I decided to sit down and watch it. I also had friends tell me about it, so I kinda had an idea of what I was getting into before I started the video. Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is a web series that presents itself as a children's entertainment property, something akin to Sesame Street or Blue's Clues. The story has 3 characters sitting around a table in a kitchen before the song begins. It doesn't take long before violent, gory, and strange imagery and videos start to corrupt the song. Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared would develop a sizable following and even be given a time slot on TV. The video would get a few sequels on YouTube before this, though. The first video sits at a total view count of 79 million. 2014 was the year of FNAF, but there was another horror game that scared people much more and would go on to also create its own genre of horror games. This year would give us PT, or Playable Teaser. This game dropped onto PS4 without warning and quickly became the center of the gaming community. PT was created by Konami and was set to tease a new game. The only way to find that out, though, was through completing the game. You had to play through its terror and not die. The visuals were stunning, the horror terrifying, and the story cryptic. It was the perfect storm of content for whatever this game was teasing. To complete the game, you need to travel down this hallway over and over again. This was a loop game, maybe not the first, but definitely the one that popularized it. Each time you went through the loop, the game would change something. There wasn't a horror YouTuber alive who didn't cover this game on release. Once the game was completed, you would get your reward of finding out that this was a teaser for a new Silent Hill game called Silent Hills. It was being produced by Kojima, with Guillermo del Toro helping to write the story and starring Norman Reedus of The Walking Dead fame. It was a perfect storm of hype and the internet was ready for it, until it was cancelled, after Konami decided to cancel it and fire Kojima. The game was soon removed from the PlayStation Store, with the only way to play it being that you downloaded the game before it went offline. Even then, you couldn't update the PS4 or you'd lose access to the game. 2013 also gave us one of the strangest stories to hit Reddit. This story had been dubbed The Secret Staircase and talks of a Redditor who found a strange hidden staircase in their parents' room. The staircase led to a crawl space hidden within the house. It looked like someone had been living there, but the worst part was that they found their stolen Halloween candy in there, which meant that whoever was hiding in there had snuck into the house at some point. The follow-up talks about how they left their house with their parents, vowing not to return. According to the poster, the police took everything from the hidden room as evidence. The police claimed that whoever was living there was only doing so periodically based on the lack of supplies. The only entrance to the secret room was through the parents' room, so they had to enter the house and exit without being seen somehow. The story ends with a short Q&A, but nothing beyond that. This was part of a trend to move towards real-world horror content. The internet seemed to want more realistic stories. Reddits like Let's Not Meet and Creepy Encounters were quickly becoming very popular. These took on real-world stories about meeting potentially dangerous people or being in dangerous situations. Around 2014 is when creepypastas would see their loss in popularity, but we still had a few incredible stories in this year. My favorites were Where Bad Kids Go, Antron, and The Other Internet. All of these were great stories, but not nearly as fondly remembered as the stories in the years prior. 2014 was the year when No Sleep officially became the more popular horror writing site. The most popular story of that year, and the one that many consider the best story on the whole subreddit, was I'm a search and rescue officer for the US Forest Service. I have some stories to tell. This story appeared in 2015 and came from a supposed search and rescue officer. The story told of the strange, weird, and creepy encounters they saw while on the job. The first is of a boy who was taken by a bear man. Not a man in a bear costume, a man who was covered in fur, according to the boy's sister. He is never seen again. The next is about a little girl who climbs a tree but never comes down. Her family spends hours calling for her, but she is never seen again. This leads to a search for a man who went climbing and hadn't been seen in a few days. They find him stuck in a crevice by his leg. As they were moving the man off of the mountain, he told them how he got stuck. He made his ascent up the mountain with ease, but saw something strange at the top. He saw another man with no climbing gear, wearing a parka and ski pants. When he went up to talk to the man, he saw that the man had no face. He quickly tried to make his way off of the mountain and got stuck. Throughout the night, he could hear the faceless man descending the mountain, with muffled screams following. The final story discusses the main interest that many would have in this story, the mentioning of something that most search and rescue officers deal with but never talk about: finding strange staircases in the woods that lead nowhere. This is the piece that caught the interest of the internet. No Sleep as a subreddit is interesting for a few reasons, but the main one is the prime rule of the board. You have to act like it's all real, every story, because all comments are treated like they are part of the story. The mods are pretty strict about this, but it does make the board a fun place to read some scary stories. No Sleep may have built off what creepypasta started, but it wasn't the only one doing so. There was a new kind of horror medium that would start to grow in 2015, but really see its growth in the 2020s. I'm talking about analog horror. 2015 was the release year for Local 58, a story told through a series of videos on YouTube that mimic emergency broadcast messages. The story here is heavily up for interpretation, but the linking factors appear to be an insurmountable force heading for the US, and it's coming from the sky. This could mean a lot of things, and is better experienced than told. Local 58 was created by Chris Straub, who would also help write for the 4-season Channel Zero horror anthology series. This was a TV series that adapted creepypastas and No Sleep stories into their show. It wasn't insanely popular, but it did air in the 2010s. Each season took inspiration from a different story. Season 1 was taken from Candle Cove, Season 2 was from No End House, Season 3 was from Search and Rescue, and Season 4 was from The Hidden Door. Each story loosely used what they were based on, except for the first 2 seasons, which directly used the Candle Cove show and the No End House. A few big horror games caught the internet's attention in 2015. The first was Spooky's House of Jump Scares, later changed to Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion. This game gained a rather sizable audience the year it came out, which was only a few months after FNAF. The game was released in 2014, but would see most of its content drop in the following year. The game has the player exploring a derelict mansion on the edge of town. Upon entering the mansion, you're greeted by Spooky, a ghost girl who introduces the game to you. There are 1,000 rooms to explore, and you are ready to start from there. You explore through some pretty comical areas before the game starts to dump the horror on you. It starts cute and fun, but turns horrific as you explore the 1,000 rooms. Pieces of lore can be found, and so can the specimens. Other horror games that were released in 2015 were Until Dawn and Soma. Both of these are excellent horror games for different reasons. Both had a small following online upon release, but clearly were going in different directions. Until Dawn was a PS4 exclusive until recently. It was told in a monster movie, 80s slasher movie style. There was a group of friends meeting up again after a tragedy that affected the group. One that you play out at the beginning of the game. You play as different friends and sort of design your own movie based on the actions that you take. The game plays out very much like a movie. Your choices matter for not just what happens in the story, but also who lives and dies. The game doesn't end if someone is killed by the monsters or falls to their deaths out in the wilderness. No, you keep playing with less of a cast. There are numerous ways you can reach the end of the game, and that's the selling point of it. You are the director of the story, and you decide who lives and who dies. Or you can save almost everyone and get the best ending. Soma, on the other hand, takes an entirely different approach to how the story is told. Firstly, the game is from the same studio that made Amnesia: The Dark Descent, so you know what gameplay to expect. It's a lot of note reading, puzzle solving, and piecing together the story through logs. The atmosphere is the scariest part of the game as you explore the futuristic surroundings. The plot is a mix of sci-fi horror and an extinction theme. It uses these themes very well and really places you directly at the center of the story. The environments, the enemies, and the sound design make this a must-play for any fans of horror games. Moving away from games, 2015 was the start of another trend. Cursed images were popularized this year, with the first cursed image being posted on Tumblr by an account called Cursed Images. The first image they posted could hardly be considered a cursed image, but it was the start of the trend. From this Tumblr account, it spread to the rest of the internet. Twitter, Reddit, and Facebook were soon flooded with cursed image accounts. The content of each account varied widely, with some posting more comical images, while others posted nightmare fuel. There are tons of examples, but I'll show you just a few that have come across my timeline multiple times since they were posted. The Teletubby image and the Mickey mascot in a basement are two images that have stuck with me for a very long time. 2015 wasn't done with us just yet. We still have a few more entries to talk about. Starting with the Charlie Charlie challenge. This was a challenge that started sometime in Mexico. It's believed that the first video was posted in 2014, but it wasn't popularized online until 2015. The challenge was simple. You place two pencils on top of one another in a cross formation. You write words on each new corner of the piece of paper, usually yes or no. Then you start to ask Charlie to play his game. He will answer yes if you can play and no if not. Then you ask him yes or no questions like with a Ouija board. The challenge wasn't popular for very long, but it was still a part of 2015. The last topic of 2015 is sadly the worst one. A deep web game going under the name of Sad Satan was posted online. A YouTube channel called Obscure Horror Corner posted a Let's Play series of the game. It was described as a strange and terrifying game found somewhere within the deep web. The game would get played by a few of the bigger channels before a whole slew of news about the game came forward. Sad Satan was supposedly a game that carried illegal content within. Stuff that I won't be discussing here. The truth seems to be that the game had none of that content at first. A user on 4chan calling themselves the creator of the game would release a copy of the game that had all of that illegal content added in. This person was believed to have been arrested after users reported the game. The link is simply that the man who was arrested had a similar name to the one who posted the illegal version of the game. All that aside, Sad Satan wasn't much of a game to begin with. You just walked around a strange world and were occasionally jump scared by disturbing images and gore. There was also loud, discordant music playing in the background, but nothing more. The game would likely be forgotten if it wasn't for the man making the illegal version, and thus becoming an internet urban legend all its own. 2016 would start with a slew of new indie horror games, the first of which is a title called Tattletale. This was a game where you had to aid these little Furby-inspired toys called Tattletales. The game took place around Christmas, but was horror all the way through. This was one of the first horror titles to appear in that year. Another series that started in 2016 was Welcome to the Game. In Welcome to the Game, the player was tasked with finding a red room on the deep web. To do so, they must navigate through various websites and piece together the URLs. This wouldn't be so hard if it weren't for the two threats that the player must also avoid. One person, called the Kidnapper, will try and break into the player's house. You can stop this by turning off the lights and staying quiet until they leave. There's another antagonist called the Breather, who also needs to be avoided. You do this by holding the window shut or blocking the door for a certain amount of time. The game uses a unique blend of horror elements to make a very unique experience. Layers of Fear would also release the first game in their series in 2016. Many people called the game a walking horror simulator. You would walk around in an abandoned house, and scary stuff would happen as you did. There was a story to piece together as you explored the house, collected notes, and paid attention to the level design. Lastly, there was a game called Oxenfree, which took the choice-based gameplay of other titles to a whole nother level. The story is told through a girl named Alex who is going to spend a weekend with some friends on an island. Shortly after the night begins, creepy, ghostly stuff begins to unfold. The story has multiple endings, but most lead back to playing the game again. You'll have to find the right combination of choices to find the best ending. I won't spoil that here, but it is a fun game with engaging exploration and a dark story. The biggest event of 2016 didn't take place only online, but was found out in the real world as well. 2016 was the year of a host of creepy clown sightings. These sightings started in August of that year in the state of South Carolina. The clowns were reportedly trying to lure children into the woods. This was only the first sighting, as soon many other creepy clowns were seen all across the US. The sightings were captured on video enough times to make a whole montage out of them. It wasn't just the US, as clown sightings were soon being reported in the UK, Germany, and Sweden. The latter was attached to a stabbing that took place. The clown sightings dominated the final months of 2016. Sightings would die out as quickly as they began. Whatever the true purpose of the clowns was, we may never know, though it was likely done as a joke that the whole world was not in on. 2017 brought with it more indie horror games, and ARGs that would soon be all the internet talked about. Starting with the release of Bendy and the Ink Machine, which was trying to grab the attention of the same crowd as FNAF. The game would become immensely popular with children and Let's Players alike. The internet seemed to really like two parts about the FNAF series: the non-linear storytelling and the safe enough for kids to enjoy horror aspects of the series. Bendy would follow the same principles and even had their own cast of horror mascots to sell as merchandise. This was the year when the new term of mascot horror was starting to really be thrown around. The gameplay takes the player to an exploration of an old animation studio where the character you play as used to work. The whole place has been corrupted by the ink machine, and you'll need to explore to uncover the story. This story was told episodically and had a rather large following online. The game was inspired by BioShock, and that shows in a few ways. Overall, it's a game that was successfully able to carve a niche out of the new indie horror game community. Moving on, the most interesting release of 2017 by far was the creation of Petscop. Presented like a Let's Play series of an obscure unreleased PS1 game, Petscop was an unfiction story that would captivate the internet. The faux Let's Play series followed the narrator's exploration of the game. The story is presented through a man named Paul, who is recording the game for a friend. The game has you solving puzzles to catch pets. This is where the game starts to tell its subtle story, through various means such as names for the pets and actions taken in the game. The story unfolds in a way that you wouldn't expect. Petscop is an excellent unfiction story. It feels inspired by many internet horror stories that came before it, but also has enough of its own identity. There are quite a few videos that fully dissect the story of Petscop that you can watch online, or you can watch the whole thing yourself over on the Petscop YouTube channel. 2017 graced the internet with a few more interesting indie horror games. The next I'll mention is Faith. Faith is a horror game that took a lot of inspiration from The Exorcist. In it, you play as a man named John Ward, who's entering a forest looking for a house. This is where the majority of the gameplay will take place. The forest is full of randomized locations, save for the important landmarks you'll find with notes and such. You're supposed to find a house in the woods and find out why John has come here. The game is a minimalist, top-down graphic style. It's reminiscent of early game consoles in its simplicity. The game was well received and would go on to get more games over the years. finally finishing its storyline in 2021. Another game that came out in 2017 was Doki Doki Literature Club. At first glance, you'd expect this to be just another visual novel released on Steam. Well, that's kind of correct, only there's more to it than that. Doki Doki Literature Club would play out like your usual dating sim before taking a dark and twisted turn, one that broke the fourth wall and required you to delete some files from your PC to complete the game properly. Doki Doki Literature Club was part of a trend of games presenting as non-horror titles before switching it up. Games like Cooking Companions, Duck Season, Omori, and Spec Ops: The Line. Each of these presented differently but turned into horror over time. There are far more examples of the ones I've given above as well. Now 2017 also gave us one final piece of horror content, well if you want to call it that. 3 AM challenge videos would also go viral this year and quickly become something that wasn't so horror focused. These videos would feature someone calling a spooky character or something, and then ghostly things would start to happen. These quickly turned more into jokes for clicks than anything else though. 2018 was a year light on indie horror titles, but there were updates to a few we've talked about before, including Welcome to the Game 2. Welcome to the Game 2 took everything that was done in the first game and improved upon it. The game was harder, with more threats and more defined. 2018 was also the year that would continue the trend of corrupting childhood media with the creation of gore-filled content. Most of us probably grew up with some form of Garfield media. Even if you didn't, you probably know who Garfield is. This was the year that the internet decided that Garfield should be scary, and he was subsequently turned into an eldritch abomination known as Gorefield. Gorefield got its start with a comic that was posted online in 2013. In it, John wakes up to find his house is completely patterned like an orange cat. When he enters the dining room, he finds Garfield's face on the wall, where he says, "I'm sorry, John. I was just so hungry." This one piece of art would inspire a whole subreddit to be created with the name of I'm Sorry, John. This was created in 2018, and a lot of the art that would appear here would all be related to the same style of transforming Garfield into horror. There are some incredible pieces of body horror shown here, some that really take the IP of Garfield and properly corrupt it. 2018 had one main entity that was above all others though. This was the year that Siren Head was released onto the internet. A piece of art created by Trevor Henderson, who had created other pieces that also went viral, but not nearly as close to his creation of Siren Head. Siren Head was a tall, gaunt figure with a head made of two sirens. These sirens were able to mimic human voices, distress signals, and many other sounds. The body of Siren Head looked emaciated with skin the color of rusted metal, its limbs stretched on for what seemed like forever. Siren Head was also an immediate hit with the internet. It would see two separate phases in its popularity. The original image went viral, but it would do it again in 2020, which is a story for a different video. The original image was quickly spread around the internet and became almost a Slender Man-like figure. 2018 would come to an end with a final challenge that was spreading fear across the internet, mainly with parents. This topic is considered demonetizable for some reason, so I can only vaguely reference it. There was a challenge hoax that started in 2018 involving a bird-looking humanoid creature. The challenge would have targeted children, and it set off a panic that lasted for a year following it. There's not much more than that, though, that I can really say. Just know that it was a hoax, and there was never any child endangerment found to be connected to it. 2019 is the final year, and is one that didn't have too much to write about. 2019 gave the internet Gemini Home Entertainment, an analog horror story that tells of an alien invasion by a cosmic entity known only as the Iris. The story is told through VHS-style tape recordings and pieces fed to the audience through clues. There's also a game attached to the project which expands upon what is happening. 2019 would go out with a bang with one final piece created that would soon shape the horrors of the 2020s. An anonymous user would post the image of the backrooms with the first piece of lore attached. It would spawn so many creations, most of which wouldn't become popular until the next decade. With that, the 2010s come to a close. Here we had some of the most influential pieces of internet horror media, and the start to many new genres of horror media that would soon become commonplace in the 2020s. We started with creepypastas, weird videos, and ARGs, but now we have unfiction stories and analog horror. The internet is an ever-changing place with loads of content uploaded daily. No matter what comes next, we will all be able to experience it together. Big shout out to my patrons over on Patreon: Victor Estrada, Nora Kingsley, Icyman, Memtendo, Joe Gillespie, Richie Easy Money Sniper 35, Miriam Reyes, and Austin Henshaw. This video took a lot more work than I was expecting, and I know that I'm missing quite a few pieces of horror history here. I barely touched on the Slenderverse or the ARGs that were popular in the 2010s. There were also more video games to cover, but this isn't a comprehensive timeline, and more just a collection of horror works that were popular in the time range. Either way, hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. I have another decade retrospective in the works starting in the 2000s. If you have anything you'd want to see on that list or in that video, please let me know in the comments below. And I hope to see you all in the next video for that. Take care, friends. I hope you all have a good night.